Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Pedro Acosta, and I'm the Digital Content Manager for the Association of Proposal Management Professionals, APMP, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another edition of APMP's sponsored webinar series. Today's presentation from Lohfeld Consulting Group is called Planning and Delivering Winning Orals Presentations. Our typical webinars are free to APMP members as a benefit of their membership, and we do our best to keep them vendor agnostic, or in other words, we want our webinars to offer takeaways that you can begin implementing immediately, without having to solicit any particular services or products. We've learned over time that many of our topics do deal with technology solutions, and a fair amount of our members are clamoring for more information about the products and services themselves. So while APMP remains vendor neutral, we want to offer options where a vendor can produce a presentation for you with no restriction to the content they provide. These sponsored webinars might include product demos, best practices to utilize with other products, but maybe things that only the vendor software can do, and so on. As always, you'll receive a survey afterwards, and please let us know your thoughts about every aspect of this experience. Was it clear to you what you want to see? Was it valuable to you? What advice do you have for the vendor? We do share your comments with the presenters. And before I turn things over to our presenters, know that today's session is being recorded. A link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants a few hours after the presentation is over. As you think of questions today throughout today's session, I encourage you to check out the GoToWebinar control panel, where you'll find the questions pane. You can type your questions there at any time during the presentation, and we will do our best to address them later in the webinar. All right, I think we're ready to go now, so I'll turn things over to today's presenters, David Taylor and Beth Wingate. Go ahead, Beth.
Thanks, Pedro. Welcome, everybody. I'm Beth Wingate, President of Lohfeld Consulting Group, an APMP Fellow, former CEO of APMP International, and former President of the APMP National Capital Area Chapter. I've been with Lohfeld Consulting for almost 15 years now, and I've managed proposals for small, mid-size, and large government contractors for over 30 years, including training teams in proposal best practices, writing sections of the APMP body of knowledge, and co-writing 6 books on capture and proposal best practices. We're actually working on our 7th book right now, so stay tuned. Next slide. David Taylor is a principal consultant with Lohfeld Consulting Group, providing proposal and orals consulting. With over 30 years in international high technology businesses, David has experience in engineering, project management, product management, business development, and senior level leadership. He's done hundreds of orals presentations around the world, including one in Japan, where he had to present in Japanese, and they won, and in South America, where the orals lasted 3 days. In past careers, David has been an airline pilot with British Airways, a director of management information services, and a vice president with a major software manufacturer. David has a diploma in electrical engineering, a master's in business administration, and a PMP certification. David is an APMP certified proposal professional. Next slide. Let's jump into the content of our discussion today. David, take it away.
Thank you, Beth. And good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the first of a 2-part series. Today we're going to cover planning for an orals, along with building the oral slides and the talk track script. In the second part, we'll cover orals delivery and presentation technique. Watch for notices of part 2, scheduled for September 7 as part of the APMP Chesapeake chapter series of webinars. So, big question. Exactly why do customers want an orals? This maxim here is so true. Proposals are not read, they're scored. Consequently, I'm going to focus on maximizing the scoring for an orals. I treat an orals as if it's a job interview, which is exactly what it is. Customers want to meet the real people who will actually do the work when you win. Scoring is defined usually in the RFP evaluation criteria. So what do customers want to get out of an orals? The orals is a test drive for the customer. I apologize to sales, business development, our capture colleagues, but the customer does not want to hear from you. The customer wants to assess for themselves that our proposed key personnel are truly competent. The customer wants to verify our proposed team members work together well. This is especially important if we have key partners. Small things like all wearing the same style name badge, having a common virtual background, and friendly banter among team members all help to reinforce this. The customer wants a comfort level that will be easy to work with. People buy from people they like. This may sound subjective and unfair, but always remember, the orals is a job interview. Being easy to work with can be reinforced by showing an agenda that exactly matches the instructions. If the customer has 2 or 3 well-qualified bidders, the orals can help them decide who to go with. So design your orals to maximize scoring against the published evaluation criteria. Don't waste time and words on seemingly good information that will not help your scoring. What matters to the evaluators? In this list of what the evaluators are looking for, I'm always especially tuned into the 4th bullet here. US government evaluators are looking for an exceptional solution and opportunity to score us with a strength, such as beneficially offering more than the minimum requirements. They think this brings merit and value. Don't hesitate to emphasize these and help the evaluators to note them. In the second list here, pay attention to the first item. Stay focused on presenting only material that resonates with the customer's evaluation criteria. Remember, proposals are not read, they're scored. Remember to stay focused on the customer who's always thinking, what's in it for me? Your oral slides have to be 100% consistent with your spoken words and 100% consistent with all written submissions, such as plans for program management, staffing, quality, and risk. The last item in this list is very important. You can finish 10 minutes early, but it can be fatal to be even 1 second over the time limit. Expect you will be summarily cut off at the end of your allotted time. Polished presenters are great, but remember, the customer mostly wants to meet the real people. The major types of orals and their differences. There are many differences and many similarities. There's a big difference between in-person and virtual orals, such as the presentation we're doing right now. And there's a big difference between US federal government orals and the vast range of classical orals required for state and local government, commercial customers, and international customers. So let's look at a few of these. Since the arrival of COVID, virtual orals have become commonplace. With an in-person orals, it's relatively easy to interact with the audience. You can see immediately how you're being received. You can and should make eye contact with every person in the audience. In the photo here, the woman presenting can see and hear acknowledgement from the audience. On the other hand, a virtual orals is a very impersonal experience, but there are techniques that can help you. Looking directly into your camera is an effective way for you to make eye contact with each member of your virtual audience. But you will still need to constantly add stimulation and interest in your material to avoid your audience getting distracted or, as you see here, even falling asleep. I want to talk about classical orals and the other extreme, US government FedSim orals, 2 ends of a spectrum. In a classical orals, you'll typically prepare and submit volumes such as management, technical, and pricing. If you're fortunate to be called to orals, you then prepare and present your oral slides. At the other end of the spectrum is a US government FedSim proposal, where your entire technical solution is prepared and submitted as oral slides. Then in the orals, you get to talk to those very same slides. In a classical proposal, your oral slides will be graceful and aesthetically easy on the eye. Typically 8 lines to a page and 8 words to a line. Your graphics will be easy to comprehend at a glance. For FedSim, your slides are going to be crammed full of material with a 10-point font just to prove full compliance with the RFP instructions. In both cases, you should expect the Q&A session to cover all of your written submissions. So make sure your presenters are familiar with everything that's been submitted and they have copies available at the orals. For US government orals, there are some jargon terms with the US government and FedSim proposals. These evaluators are legally constrained to score your proposal only against the evaluation criteria published in the RFP. So match your orals exactly to the RFP instructions, including the customer's agenda for the orals. Assume the evaluators use a checklist to verify that we address the exact specific things requested in the RFP instructions. No more, no less. Make it easy for them. Use the RFP vocabulary as much as possible. Evaluators will rank proposals according to whose proposal is the best. A usual criterion for being deemed the best is where evaluators can ascertain what the government calls strengths. Lofeld Consulting advocates using a strength-based solutioning approach where you show where we bring merit, we beneficially exceed minimum requirements, our proposal is very advantageous to the customer, our proposal is superior, and of course, all these need to have evidence as proof. Keep in mind your orals might not be recorded. Government evaluators are required to have a record of the orals, so talk at a pace where the evaluators can take notes. I recommend aiming for about 120 to 135 words per minute. And hold a special pink team and a red team just for the orals. But make sure your red team members include somebody who knows the government agency and somebody who knows GSA or FedSim if applicable. Talking about FedSim, if you're doing a US FedSim proposal for the first time, check out the excellent material online at fedsim.gsa.gov and getting started. Watch the video, FedSim Introduction to the TEB, or you can just Google FedSim and take it from there. Now, talking about planning the orals. We'll look at some specific goals for an orals, talk more about strengths, and those strengths should be identified in your capture plan. We'll look at scheduling for an orals, talk about how to select your orals team, and starting early, months ahead of time, or at the very latest, when the draft RFP material is published. What are the goals for an orals? I use an MPV, minimum primary visionary approach to plan my goals for any customer encounter. I start out by defining the absolute minimum that must be achieved. And then I go on to define my primary goals, the next most important things after I've secured my minimum goals. And then finally, I like to know what are my visionary goals. I plan so I know exactly what to go for if I've already met my minimum and my primary goals. The value of this approach is you never lose focus on the absolute minimum that must be achieved. And then if the opportunity presents itself, you know exactly what constitutes the absolute best that you could achieve. Now that's in general. Here's a very specific example of my MPV for an orals. In the context of an orals, the items here are the bare minimum you must do. I always start with selling the presenters and then selling our solution. Each of the items here is imperative. Success is most easily achieved when the audience buys into the presenters. In the minimum goals, we have to prove compliance. Then in the primary goals, we have to elevate from compliant to compelling and maximize our scoring. I once did an orals where we achieved the minimum primary goals, and then I had the opportunity to make the deal even sweeter. I knew the customer had additional funding available. We were able to extend the period of performance from 5 years to 7 years. Always be ready by knowing your visionary goals to maximize the value of the win. In the next slide, I'll talk about how essential it is to have fully signed off capture plan and what you need from it. Capture plans can be very brief or very detailed, but you must have one. Without a signed off capture plan, orals planning is at a severe disadvantage. Here's an easy, minimal template for a capture plan. The topics in yellow have the most impact on proposals and orals preparation. They include, top left, understanding what problem the customer wants to solve. This keeps us focused on the customer's mission objectives. Then what are the customer's hot buttons, top center? What do they care about the most? We can enhance our success by knowing as much as possible about our key competitors, bottom left, and how are they going to tackle that opportunity? What are the competitors' strategies? Top right, we need to know our strategies to win. And in the middle on the right, very important, what are the strengths and the win themes that we want to reinforce throughout our proposal and our orals? The US government defines strengths as including where we bring merit, reduce or eliminate risk, reduce cost, beneficially provide more than the minimum requirements, and enhance achieving mission objectives. I have 3 criteria for commercial strengths or win themes: something beneficial to the customer, unique to us, and provable. That middle one is generally quite tough. Strengths and win themes are what result in winning. If you have doubts about any of these for your orals, talk to your capture manager. Your capture manager should be providing you with these. For an oral schedule, one of the most demanding schedules is for a US government FedSim opportunity. You'll typically have just 30 days after the final RFP to prepare and submit the oral slides, together with the pricing and all the other required submittals, such as plans for management, staffing, and quality. It's essential you make maximum advantage of all the time after the draft RFP is released. And if there's no draft RFP, you can build your own. If you know the customer well enough and you've seen proposals before, RFPs before, you can build your own draft RFP together with draft instructions and draft evaluation criteria. You need to quickly secure the key personnel presenters, prepare a full draft proposal complete with oral slides for the technical solution, and prepare a draft talk track script. More on that later. On release of the final RFP, you'll have just 30 days. The actual orals could be scheduled just a few days after submission. I encourage you to achieve at least 6 full-timed practice runs, including Q&A sessions. Your presenters usually have a day job as well, and each practice could take 4 hours or more, so I recommend no more than three a week. One-on-one individual coaching is the best way to help each presenter give an optimum performance. Keep in mind, many of our presenters will have never done an orals before. Building the orals team. With the US government orals, you're likely required to have only your key personnel presenting. Ideally, your program manager should be a strong presenter and have name and face recognition with the customer. You're probably going to need subject matter experts, corporate representatives, partner companies, but don't forget all the resources you need for the slide text, a book boss for the slides, the slide graphics, you need a graphic artist, a timekeeper to make sure you stay on time, and if this is a virtual orals, a back channel manager. This is a means to allow your team to caucus off camera when working out the answer to a question. Technical support is valuable, especially when you have to manage IT to deliver your orals. All of this is going to vary depending on the size of your company. So refine your team as needed. You might be lucky. You might have a specialist for every single function, or you might be a jack of all trades doing it all yourself. I believe we have to sell the presenters. You want strong subject matter experts who are excellent presenters, but that's not easy. The highlighted bullet here is very important. Polished presenters are very helpful, but keep in mind the customer really wants to meet the real people that they're going to work with day in and day out after you win the job. The customer probably values strong technical knowledge much more than having professional presenters. So feel free to emphasize to the customer that you brought presenters who are technically solid, and beg forgiveness if the presenters do not have the silky smooth speaking skills of TV presenters and salespeople. If you have, keep in mind that when you select your key personnel, they probably are going to have to present at the orals. Keep that in mind. If you have the flexibility, build your orals team to match the skill levels and seniority levels of your customer. For commercial proposals, without the limitation of having only key personnel presenters, if your customer brings a finance person, take a finance person. If your customer brings a safety person, take a safety person with you. And ideally, have a company principal decision maker as part of your orals team, so that in the Q&A session, you never have to say, sorry, I'll have to check with the office to answer that question. Above all, do as much as possible as early as possible. Don't leave planning till the last minute. Number 1 here, get your orals team trained and aligned with a single approach. Number 2, identify your presenters as early as possible, especially the program manager, who may have to present over half the slides. Number 3, ensure your capture manager gives you that capture plan that defines the strengths or win themes you're going to reinforce in the orals. Number 4, develop a template for slides for a uniform look and feel. Include space for taglines to reinforce your strengths and those win themes. Number 5, start developing the oral slides and talk track early. Keep in mind your talk track is writing for the ear, not for the eye, so make the talk track script conversational. Number 6, plan how your team will caucus for Q&A if your orals is virtual. Plan a back channel, something like Skype. Number 7, start building a bank of sample questions for the Q&A practice. Number 8, for a virtual orals, prepare a standard virtual background with your company logo. And then number 9 here, conduct individual sessions with each presenter to check their IT setup for virtual orals, but also to assess their individual challenges and strengths as presenters and the coaching needed from you. You have to analyze the RFP to design the orals. Proposals are not read, they're scored. So adhere 100% to the customer's instructions and to the evaluation criteria. Don't waste words and time with extraneous material that will not help your scoring. Use a disciplined approach to designing your orals to respond to the customer's instructions and the evaluation criteria. Use the RFP instructions and evaluation criteria to guide you. This exercise usually takes me a lot of paper, but with a small font, it can be fit on one sheet of paper. Start by copying verbatim the text from the RFP instructions. Break it into blocks of data, one block for each factor in the RFP. Below this, copy verbatim the text from the RFP evaluation criteria. Ideally, the evaluation criteria should correlate one-to-one with the instructions. It's a red flag for you if they do not correlate. Separately, decipher the evaluation criteria to determine which factors will get the most score, i.e., they're described as more important or significantly more important. From this, determine how much time and how many slides to devote to each topic, scientifically aligned with how the customer is going to allocate scoring. RFPs will often not require an introduction or a closing section, but these are valuable for you to set the stage, build credibility for the presenters, and to summarize your strengths at the end of the presentation. From the instructions, make a list of the subtopics to cover in each section of the orals. In the next slide, it's an eye chart, we're going to look at an example of how to calculate slide counts and time allocation. We usually have to cover a lot of material in very little time. This example is derived from what was published as instructions, section L, and evaluation criteria, section M. There were 4 factors evaluated for the proposal. The total orals time was capped at 75 minutes. I reserved 7 minutes for an introduction and 3 minutes for a close, leaving 65 minutes for the body of the orals. These are the 4 factors in the proposal. And here's how I derived the allocation of scoring potential in the orals for factors 1, 2, and 3. 30% of the score went to factor 1, 25% to factor 2, 20% to factor 3. Factor 4, corporate experience, was pass-fail, so it did not count for the orals. But together, these total 75% and were rated as significantly more important than price. So I estimated price at 25%, making the total score 100%. There were no score points available for corporate experience, yielding 40%, 33%, 27% as the available scoring potential for factors 1, 2, and 3. This suggested spending 26 minutes, 22 minutes, and 17 minutes on each of factors 1, 2, and 3. I reserved a fixed 10 slides and 3 slides for the introduction and the close. And I wanted to spend about 1.5 minutes per slide up here. So my page count for the slides for factors 1, 2, and 3 was 17 slides, 14 slides, and 12 slides, plus my 10 slides for the introduction and 3 slides for the close, making my total slide count 56 slides. The target number of words for the talk track was 188 words per slide, averaging 125 words per minute. Now these numbers should all be adjusted as needed, but they give you a very useful starting point, evidence-based, using an allocation suggested by what the evaluators will consider most important, not based on what I consider most important. Next is to talk about building the oral slides. I want to talk about how to design your slide layouts, what size font to use, whether you should use PowerPoint animation, and then how to get the best value from graphics. I actually like to reuse proposal graphics as much as I can. I want you to develop a visually appealing slide style. I generally use 16:9 format to optimize how the audience will view the slides. Keep in mind, your audience could be viewing with any and all of a large screen with a projector, a large desktop monitor, a laptop, an iPad, a smartphone, or they could be looking at just a printed copy in color or black and white. Unless you know what your audience will use, assume they could be using any of these. So try printing your slides in black and white and see if they're still fully effective in getting your message across. If you have a corporate style, then use it to the extent it helps. But don't be afraid of varying that style if necessary for your orals. I usually work with a 16:9 format, but do be careful if the customer wants a printed version. You should optimize the white space on the paper. And be careful of using too many slides with a dark, solid color background, like the left on this slide. It's been known for printers to burn out if you print slides with white text on a black background. Font selection has to comply with the RFP instructions, but err on the side of excellent legibility. With the FedSim orals, you'll be working mostly with Times New Roman, 10 and 12 point. For classical orals, I recommend 18 to 32 point font for optimal legibility. Keep bold, italics, color, and PowerPoint animations to a minimum. If you bold everything, nothing stands out. And make sure your audience can absorb graphics at a glance. They may only have a few seconds to absorb what's on your screen before you move to the next slide. Use the right choices in PowerPoint. Above all, be consistent with the look and feel of your slides. A consistent style makes it much easier for the audience to absorb each slide quickly. The US government will generally require Times New Roman, which is not my favorite. I prefer a sans serif font for legibility. If the RFP instructions do not permit smaller fonts in tables and graphics, then submit a question asking for this to be allowed. Here you can see the visual effect of different fonts and different font sizes. When we get down to 10 point, you'll see it's just about legible, and that's where we go to in a FedSim oral slide. There we go with 10 point. And 8 point, you can't read it. 12 point and 10 point font in FedSim oral slides almost requires that the audience has a printed copy and has read it in advance. You can always use larger fonts, but be careful with bold. Just as in all proposals, only proper nouns start with a capital letter, and be consistent in how you punctuate bullet lists. Save color for the few places where you really need text to stand out. And PowerPoint animations can be very distracting. If your customer wants a hard copy or has a PDF copy, all animations are going to be lost. Graphics. In proposals, I like to see a non-text item on every page, just to break up the gray matter of text. The same goes for oral slides. Good use of graphics is useful to convey messages and emotions, but keep the graphics legible and aesthetically pleasing. I often use PowerPoint over Adobe Illustrator just because it gives me freedom to make essential edits right up to the last minute. If you have graphic specialists, engage them early, right at the start, so they get to understand your proposal. If you have a large, complex graphic, consider also showing an exploded view of a small part of the graphic, assuming there's no restriction on the slide count. At the bottom here, ensure your presenters are comfortable with the slides they're going to present, and they take ownership of the slides in the talk track. With complex slides like this, and this is a fairly simple Gantt chart, add markers such as ABC, so the presenter can direct the audience's attention to specific parts of the graphic. Help the audience to navigate the slide that you're presenting. I'll give you some ideas for formatting your slides. While some slides benefit from having an individual style and format, such as transition slides, it's a good practice to have a uniform look and feel for the main body slides. Now here's a sample format. At the top of each slide, show the slide title. This is important, using the exact RFP phraseology as much as possible. We're going to make it easy for the evaluators to score and to correlate your presentation with what they ask for. At the bottom of each slide, tell the audience what the takeaway is from the slide. This should reinforce the strengths and the win themes as often as possible. Do not leave it to chance that the audience will draw the right conclusion from your slide. For classical orals, in the slide body, use a large enough font to be legible, 18 to 32 point, with typically 8 words to a line, 8 lines to a page. If you're doing a FedSim orals, then you're going to have a very dense slide with most of your text at 10 points. With FedSim, the orals is the technical proposal. So you need to be content rich just to be compliant with all the required content. In the body of the slides, have a consistent area to show your solution's benefits and the evidence with proof points. And always remember to focus on how and why, not just what you're doing. Look at the corners here. Add a cross-reference to the top right so the evaluators can correlate your slide or your presentation with the RFP. This really helps the evaluators to verify your compliance so they can give you maximum scoring. Show the slide number somewhere like bottom right, and probably your corporate logo, the bottom left. A uniform style makes it much easier for the audience to quickly absorb everything that's on the slide, especially in a very fast-paced presentation. The topics on this chart are fairly predictable for most of the orals requests you're going to get. The customer wants to meet the presenters. They want to meet the team. They want to see you've got an agenda. They want the qualifications of your key personnel. They want to know your organizational structure, lines of authority and communication. Over on the right-hand side, oftentimes they're going to be asking you for how you respond to industry standards such as PMI, PMBOK, ITIL, and ITSM. They'll always want to know your technical approach. And down the bottom right, they want to know about the methodologies, the analytical techniques and tools that you will use. And generally, customers want to hear about continuous improvement. You can use your slack time, your spare time, to build a good library of boilerplate material to cover all these topics. So that when the RFP comes out and you have to prepare the orals in a hurry, you're not scrambling to come up with the basics for these highly predictable topics. You need a talk track. I believe hardly in having a script. And I recommend building your talk track at 120 to about 130 words a minute. You will probably see a tendency for presenters to try talking faster. The phenomenon, though, is that presenters who speak the slowest tend to get the most information conveyed. So count the words in your talk track. Divide by 125 for an estimate of how many minutes are needed for each slide. Adjust the number of words to meet your time budget for each slide. Cut out the superfluous words. Manage the timing. Don't fall into the trap of letting undisciplined presenters steal time away from other presenters. Be prepared to enforce trimming words to meet the time budget. So I recommend a talk track. Some people say it's phony, it's not real, but I think it really helps. If your speakers are nervous, it's comforting. If they go off track or tend to ad lib, it helps keep them back on track. It makes it easy for a backup presenter to step in at the last minute. It's much easier for you to manage timing and not get summarily cut off before you've delivered all your slides in a powerful close. Make it easy for the customer to score you by using the customer's vocabulary from the RFP. Avoid jargon, internal jargon, and synonyms. Go back to using the RFP vocabulary. And do not simply read the slides. Introduce a slide and talk to a few items on the slide. Embellish what's on the slide. Treat it like wallpaper and a backdrop for your interesting personal experience and explaining how and why, not just what. At the bottom of this slide, remember your talk track script is to be spoken. Right for the ear, not for the eye. You don't have to be 100% grammatically correct. Make your talk track conversational. Here's a sample of a template for a talk track. I use 1 page of script for each slide you're presenting. The top left, I put the slide number and the title of the slide. At the bottom of the page, in the footer, I put a constant reminder of the strengths and win themes so that the authors of the text are constantly reminded of what we want to reinforce as often as possible. At the top right are the names of the speaker and the backup speaker. And under that is the time budget I have for the slide. I'll also use that spot to note the actual runtime when we do a practice. In the body here is exactly 240 words of script. So at 120 words per minute, this is exactly 2 minutes of material. I like to constrain people with the amount of space on the paper to limit the number of words they're trying to speak. I use Calibri 12 point, which makes the script font large enough for the speaker to be able to read at ease. Don't get stuck down in the weeds. With limited time, you cannot spend too much time on fine detail. You need to cover as much material as possible in very limited time. A good technique is to spend most of your time at a high level, the 30,000 foot level. I call this level 1. Then once in a while, drop down to provide more detail. I call this level 2. But then promptly get right back up to that high level view. Once in a great while, drop down to a level 3, way down in the weeds with a lot of detail, just to prove you can do this whenever you choose. This technique, level 1, level 2, level 3, helps you maximize the breadth of the material you can cover in a limited amount of time. And it still allows you to demonstrate that you can provide infinite detail whenever you want. A useful technique. It's tough when you can't see your audience, but this is the reality with remote virtual orals. With virtual orals, you have to do everything possible to overcome the barriers of it being very impersonal. Just as with an in-person orals, start the presentation by establishing credibility and trust. If you get credibility with the audience, they will be much more inclined to listen, watch intently, and believe you. Looking into your camera is the closest you will get to establishing eye contact with every member of a virtual audience. Do this especially when you want to make a point. If the whole presentation team is on camera, you can help your colleagues by looking interested, smiling, and nodding approval when they make a good point. If the customer specifies what method will be used for the virtual orals, Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, use that method for all your planning meetings and practice, so you get to know the tool you're going to have to use when you go live. And this is difficult, but remember, if you're on camera, smile as much as you can. People buy from people they like. Some hints and tips for orals. Have cameras set at about face level to fill about 2/3 of the screen with the camera set at eye level. The folks shown here all have their cameras at about the right level, but the impression created by the presenters could be better if the lighting eliminated shadows for the person top right. If they all had a common virtual background with the company logo, they look like a team. The dress style and the grooming is cohesive and matching the image that the customer wants to see. And once again, remember, it's a job interview. So remember to look in the camera. For major presenters, I recommend having multiple monitors and using presenter view with PowerPoint, so you can always see what's coming up next. You're going to face challenges. In remote virtual orals, you have to work very hard to overcome the challenges that come with this style of presentation. It is hard to sustain interest. You can rotate speakers, change your voice modulation, and vary the pace of delivery. If I have some great presenters and some dry presenters, I'll try to interleave them. Every new voice tends to wake up the audience. Unless you're allowed to dialogue with the audience, I don't know of any way to gauge the audience during a virtual presentation. So beware, they might have fallen asleep. But we can keep them engaged with attractive, informative slides and judicious use of highlighting, bold, and color. Help the audience navigate your slides. A little animation such as revealing lines can be useful. It's easy for the audience to lose track of who's speaking. Use photos of the speakers if you don't have cameras on. Use transition slides to explain the change of topic and introduce a new speaker. There are lots of ways of doing this. Here's one way I've shown here with a little arrow at the bottom right, indicating the name of the next presenter and the next topic coming up. You have to minimize distractions. This is regardless of whether you're virtual or face-to-face. I recommend checking the IT equipment of every presenter in advance if you're doing virtual orals. Checking, is bright sunlight or dark shade a challenge? Does the presenter's location sound like an echo chamber? Is the background cluttered? Do we have a uniform virtual background for all presenters to reinforce the perception that all presenters are a cohesive team, even if they have never all worked together before? If you do an IT check early with each presenter, you'll have time to provide the presenters with anything needed, such as a brand new PC, a new camera that could be positioned at eye level, an external microphone. Microphones in laptops sometimes are not that good, or a ring light to eliminate shadows. I'm using one right now, it helps me a little. An $18 ring light is an excellent remedy for poor lighting. In some cases, where I found a presenter to have poor local internet, the remedy has been to use a hotel room. Expect there are going to be internet drops. Plan for it, so when it happens, it does not destroy your presentation. Have backup speakers ready to jump in at any time with the script ready. Plan for all contingencies. For any style of presentation, an orals, this classical outline is proven and effective. Start with a grabber to grab the audience's attention. I once heard an outstanding version of this where the presenter started with, "Our products don't work. Our support's ineffective. We're expensive." Now that's what the competitors say about us. Now let me tell you the truth. That really woke up the audience. And then continue with the classic, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. And then ending with that call to action. This is the why us slide. Now let's look at some of the key messages we want to convey. In the opening, I recommend you do the following in this order. Introduce the speakers. Extol their virtues and credentials with a mini bio and a picture. Establish their credibility to build trust with the audience. Then, and only then, introduce your company and other companies in your team. And then after that, move on to start selling your product or solution. If the audience does not buy into the speakers as individuals, they will not really listen to anything you say. So incrementally increase the credibility of yourself, your company, and your team. Building trust is essential. If the audience knows and likes any of the presenters, that can be especially beneficial. Once again, remember, it's a job interview. Oh, down the bottom here, please check the social media presence, such as LinkedIn, for all your presenters. I've seen too many proposals with great resumes and CVs, but with LinkedIn data that presents a very different picture, or worse still, a mismatch in credentials. Social media must be supportive of what you claim in your proposal. So tell them what you're going to tell them. You can do this with an agenda slide. An agenda slide at the start of the introduction can solidify mutual expectations for the orals. It can set the evaluator's minds at ease that we've got it all covered, and can give confidence that we're going to manage the clock. By showing our agenda and having it match the RFP instructions, we demonstrate that we listen and we follow instructions. This supports the concept that we are a good team to work with. Do not let the audience miss your key points. There's a million things you can talk about. Your slides probably contain more material than you have time to present. So pick the top key items on each slide to talk to. Do not simply read the slide. The audience can read while you're talking. Talk to the 2, 3, or 4 items on each slide that will maximize your scoring. By occasionally dropping down to a level 3 with detailed information, you'll create the perception that you can go into infinite depth whenever you choose. Doing this only occasionally allows you to cover the maximum breadth of material in the limited time available to you. Help the audience draw the right conclusions from each slide. Never leave it to chance the audience is going to draw the right conclusions. Tell them. Use the taglines at the bottom of each slide and call-out boxes to emphasize your strengths and win themes. The evaluators can then copy that text in the taglines and the call boxes and put it into their evaluations. Tell them what to say. Educate and inform. I like to minimize marketing and sales hype and focus on educating. Aim to inform the audience. Tell them how we chose the elements of our solution. Explain how we will implement the solution. Don't just state what we will achieve. And above all, avoid just parroting back or paraphrasing the RFP. This really annoys evaluators. Be sure you're clear about benefits and features. The evaluators are probably interested in benefits more so than features that deliver the benefits. For anything we portray as a benefit, keep asking yourself, is this a feature or a benefit? Benefits are often best expressed as reduced cost, reduced risk, reduced schedule, better performance, legal compliance, and achieving their mission objectives. The close and the call to action. This is perhaps the most essential slide in your whole slide deck. Your timekeeper has to manage the presentation team to protect the 2, 3, or 4 minutes you're going to need for this slide. Remember, you will probably be summarily cut off when your time's up. Make sure you preserve the time needed for your closing slide. The closing slide can be text, graphics, or any other style. It has to be delivered with passion. I recommend closing with a focused reiteration of your strengths or win themes and saying how these have improved during your presentation, plus the benefits to the customer. The planning phase is most important to get this right. All too often, I'm asked to coach an orals team, and there is no real consensus on the strength of the win themes for the proposal. At the very start of the orals planning process, work closely with your capture manager, sales lead, or BD lead to ensure they provide you and the orals team with a well-documented and fully signed off list of 5 or 6 strengths or win themes. Imagine 6 months after winning, you look back and you say, we won that job based on A, B, C, D, E. What would those discriminators be? This is the item I most frequently see thwarting the orals planning process. The strengths and win themes need to be signed off by your leadership team to avoid getting fresh expert guidance from your senior leadership at the last minute. The strengths and win themes need to be included in the orals training that you give to your team at the start of the planning process. It's quite likely your subject matter experts who are authoring material have never delivered an orals presentation before. So constant reminders of the strengths and win themes helps to keep the orals team focused on maximizing the scoring. If you know the proposal strengths and win themes, they can be built into and reinforced in every element of the proposal and orals, especially this closing slide, why us? So I'll start planning this slide very early. That wraps up part 1 of this planning and delivering winning orals presentations. Watch out for part 2, delivering the orals, coming up in September. And I'll hand back to Beth to see what questions we've received. Beth?
Thanks, David. So we received some questions from our participants, and let's start off this section with those questions. In slide 9, you said to constantly add stimulation and interest. How do you do this when you have speakers who aren't animated, or you're doing a FedSim proposal with really complex slides, or you have an inherently dull topic to present?
That's a good one. In the upcoming Parts of Orals Delivery webinar and seminar, this is a great example of a single question with 3 embedded questions. You put 3 questions in there. I'm going to answer all 3 of those. I intersperse animated speakers and dull speakers and give the dull speakers fewer slides. I also coach them to reference their personal experience and stick to topics they know well. With FedSim, the slides are dense and they've got to be compliant with Section L. So speak only to the few items on the slides that really resonate with the evaluation criteria and the strengths in your proposal. But put the onus on that capture manager to develop powerful strengths. If you have none, you probably won't win. You probably should not be bidding. The bidder with the most strengths will generally win. If you've got an inherently dull topic, I recommend reverting to personal anecdotes where you can at least speak from the heart.
Definitely. Okay. During your presentation, you often said to leverage the capture plan. What do you do if you don't have a capture plan or you don't have a capture manager?
That's a sad and scary and all too familiar question. Quite frankly, I take the opportunity to develop a mini capture plan by myself with the elements that we need to develop a proposal or an orals. The slide I showed you with the mini capture plan came from an APMP seminar I did back in June 2019 called Capture Planning, How to Plan Without Any Pain. It still comes down to opportunity qualification and bidding only jobs you can win. My mantra is bid less, win more.
Definitely. How do you manage prima donna speakers who won't use a script and are inconsistent with their message and timing?
That's a tough question, but it's one that I have to tackle quite often. At the root of it, I think it's a situation where the prima donna is a fate of commitment. One tactic is to stick with the philosophy that a backup speaker has to be able to present the material if needed. So if a backup's got to be able to step in, there has to be a script. Another tactic is to ruthlessly count the words, the time taken, and emphasize the need to stay in budget. Another tactic is to appeal to the sense of fairness, because if the prima donna overruns the time budget, then other speakers are going to have to trim their valuable content. But I really think that comes down to the prima donna lacking discipline and being afraid. Personal coaching can really help.
Okay. Would it be a good idea to include thumbnails of the slides in the script? I've done that before.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I wish I put that in the webinar. I should have. I will next time. I often do this in the early stage of the rehearsals, and then I skinny down the written script when the thumbnail is no longer needed. But it's a great thing to have in there. Yes, good idea.
Yeah. For us visual learners, that's what I do.
Yep.
So I liked your concept of level 1, level 2, and level 3. Can you provide an example of using level 1, level 2, and level 3 details?
Let me think back. In the presentation I just went through, each section had an introduction slide with the main points, but no depth. That's level 1. In one slide, I think it was around 13, I called out the capture plan, one of my favorite topics. In the slides that follow that introduction to the capture plan, I mentioned that minimum primary visionary goals for orals. That added more substance. That's a level 2. And I believe passionately in the value of a good capture plan. So right after that, I gave a template with what I think is a near perfect minimal capture plan that you need to develop in orals. So that slide got down into, if you read it in depth, it got down into black hat reviews for the competition, managing customer affinity, and pricing to win. Those are much more than the basics that you need for an orals. That's an example of a level 3, I think.
And then I would suggest printing out that slide and keeping it for future reference, and everybody will get copies of the slides with the recording. What's the best and quickest way to give the presentation team a uniform look? I know you talked a little bit about that.
Oh, there's lots. Now, this is off the top of my head in random order. Having a darn good DTP editor who's going to run the rule on formatting the slides. Coming up with a common virtual background for virtual orals. If it's an in-person live orals, I like to have a common name badge style for everybody presenting. If you've got presenters from different companies and you want to come across as a single team, all have the same style name badge that has Team XYZ on it.
Nice.
But one of the very best ways, though, of coming across as a cohesive team, it happens by chance, almost. It's doing at least six full practice runs and getting your presenters to become very familiar with working together, playing off each other's strengths. It's the old concept of team building, storming, norming, and performing. When your presenters get into friendly banter with each other, it resonates with the audience and truly does make you look like a cohesive, functional team. So having everybody work together and doing at least 6 full practice runs really helps you come across as a cohesive team.
That's why they do rehearsals in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
Does it ever help to explain why you decided on a particular approach?
Absolutely. If you can show the options that were available to you and the trade-offs that you considered, you're doing the epitome of educating and informing the audience. You're getting into explaining the how and the why, not just what you're proposing.
Right, and the how is key.
Mm-hmm.
I love this question. How do you manage inputs from leadership, which are useful but arrive too late, and arrive on time but are not useful?
Those are delicate topics. But it's just the same as when you hold a proposal pink team, red team, gold team review. It goes back to one of my pet peeves on capture plans. Your capture manager should be socializing all those proposal concepts, including the strengths and win themes, with the entire leadership chain and the entire proposal team early in the pursuit process. And I think that can be best ways to cajole the corner office. Well, by doing that early with the capture manager, you can cajole the corner office to sign off on their inputs in a very timely way early. But you've got to give them the material and have the nerve to push them to respond. So the capture manager has to have the wisdom and the nerve to adjudicate those inputs for you. If that's not happening, and it does, you need to either force it to happen or maybe do it yourself. Step in and do your own capture plan and start running it by the team and up and down the leadership chain. So sometimes you might have to do double duty as the capture manager, proposal manager, orals coach, and then maybe the program manager when you win.
So triple duty, quadruple duty.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes, we have time for a couple more questions. Can you show an example of how you allocate time and slide count?
I had a slide on that with lots of numbers all over it, and it was probably a little complex and maybe too much to convey in the time we had today. But the basic principle is to align your allocation of time and slide count with the ranking of the items and the evaluation criteria. Don't focus on material that will not enhance your score. Avoid the temptation to give too much time to what you think the customer should have asked about. Focus on answering the exact questions the customer posed in the instructions and the evaluation criteria, not the questions they should have asked or the questions you wish they'd asked. Remember, proposals are not read, they're scored.
Just like your written proposal. Okay. All right, well, we're getting to time. David will answer any questions that we weren't able to get to in today's webinar in our upcoming Lowfeld Insight blog posts. So definitely check out our upcoming blogs for those answers. So final thoughts on today's webinar and sources of additional information. You can visit our website for our blog posts, free replays of our other business winning webinars, other articles, and information about our upcoming classes. You can also get information on how Lowfeld Consulting can help your proposal writing teams and your orals teams. Thank you so much for your great insights today, David. I'm really looking forward to working with you on part 2 of our orals webinar, which will cover the actual orals delivery and presentation techniques. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. As we mentioned, we'll address additional questions we received in upcoming blog posts. Have a great rest of your day.